Welcome back. Traditionally, they turn out in smaller numbers than their elders, but in a tight election, their support can make all the difference. And I'm talking about the millennials. In this election, we've seen both parties eager to woo this increasingly powerful group of young voters. I'm joined now by Alex Smith. She is the national chairman of the College Republican National Committee and a millennial herself. And I should mention she has not endorsed a particular candidate. Alex, welcome. I want to first begin by asking you about, what the presidential candidates have to do to attract young voters. There was an op-ed piece that was published on CNN.com by Julian Zelizer, a CNN contributor, and he puts it, pretty clearly that, quote, the political leaders of the parties are not talking about the issues that matter to this generation. For many millennials, the kinds of social and cultural issues that have so animated American politics since the 1980s just don't resonate. So what do young voters want to hear? What are the issues that are important, Alex?
Well, thanks so much for having me on, Amara. Absolutely, at this point in time, it's the economy for young voters, and that's true of young voters across all demographic segments. I mean, this is a generation that has dealt with double-digit youth unemployment for the last 8 years under this president. It's also a generation that's dealing with skyrocketing credit card and student loan debt. So they really want to know if they're going to have a job outside of college that's going to pay well and have them pay back their loans and pay their bills. Yeah,
someone who's talking a lot about the economy and, college debt is Bernie Sanders, right? And in some ways, Hillary Clinton as well. What is it about his message? Because when you look at his rallies, you're seeing the youth turn out in droves to Bernie Sanders. And what can the Republicans do to have that kind of appeal?
Well, what I'd say about Bernie Sanders' message right now is that it's particularly attractive to young liberals who are tuned into the process. What we know about the general election is that young independents are going to be the most important group to reach, and they're skeptical of Bernie Sanders' policies. In the focus groups and the research we've done, they're not sure that his kind of policies are the way to get us to a better future. What I will say about this generation, though, is that this is a generation that's hurting. As I mentioned before, it's dealt with terrible economic consequences over the last 8 years. And so I think when you're hurting and you're scared, a message of free sounds great. What they don't know, of course, is what's going to cost down the line. And I think that that's where conservatives need to come in and show that we have a better alternative. Because for a millennial, everything in their lives works because of free market principles and open systems that empower us to make our own choices. And so we need to get out onto campuses and make that message clear to young voters ourselves.
And who do you think amongst the Republican presidential candidates are carrying that message that the young voters want to hear?
Well, I've heard everyone from Donald Trump to Ted Cruz to Marco Rubio talk about important issues to young people like student loans and creating jobs. So they're definitely talking about the issues. Of course, we'd like to get them more onto campuses to get them communicating that message directly to our voters. But, I think that they are talking about it, and particularly someone like a Marco Rubio is using the language of this century and this generation to describe the economic policies that I think are going to resonate with young people. He talks about sort of an Uber economy, talks about the startup culture, which is really appealing and really relevant to voters.
So why do you think the Marco Rubios, the Donald Trumps, are not getting that turnout amongst the younger generation at their rallies?
Yeah, I think it's early in the process, and millennials are simply just not tuned in at this point, but they are watching closely. And what I will say is that if you go to, of course, a university or you go to a campus, you're going to get a turnout like that. We haven't seen our candidates go to a lot of those places yet. I hope to get them there by the fall. We need to get them there. But I think that millennials on the Republican side are absolutely tuned in. They're following the process closely. And I think that really shows through the youth exit polls in the different states we've seen so far. We've seen young people support Cruz in Iowa, Trump in New Hampshire, and Cruz again in South Carolina. And, the others aren't too far behind in those polls either. So really young people are considering many different candidates and really, I think, taking this decision very seriously.
You mentioned exit polls. According to thinkprogress.org, millennials could actually make up 36% of the eligible poll in 2016. And our exit polling from yesterday's South Carolina primary found about 10% of the turnout, 10%. Was young voters ages 17 to 29. What do you think about that turnout? Are you happy with that?
We'd like to see, of course, our younger Republicans participate more. But what I will say about the general election is that we know that young voters as a whole are going to decide that election. They decided it in 2012, and they're going to in 2016. They're going to make up 20% of the vote. So our party has to reach this generation. We have to be able to peel off some of those young voters if we ever hope to take back the White House. And that's a bell I've been ringing for the last 3 years. And fortunately, I think our candidates are starting to see through, watching the Bernie Sanders rallies, watching sort of what's going on campuses today with the increasing intolerance from the left and the free speech issues that we see there, that they really need to get out there and make that message heard come the general election.
Yeah, the young voters can definitely make a dramatic difference in this election. Alex Smith, great having you. Thanks for that conversation.
Thanks so much for having me.